We're keeping it simple today. We're all about Texas on the BizPo show. As I said, today we are all about Texas, and we're going to have an abbreviated BizPo show solely focused in on what's happening in the area of the country where the other half of this dynamic duo, Seth Denson, is located. Seth, please give us some insight as to what's happening right now in Texas.
Dan, good to be with you, buddy. Good to be here. Glad the lights are on in the studio. We weren't certain if that was going to be a reality or not. Certainly the lights have been out for some time. Listen, I think like most Texans, we're waking up here in the aftermath, recognizing that, this was something that I can't believe we've lived through. Certainly nothing we ever planned to. In Texas, we're built for heat. Right, we're prepared for the heat, the 120 degree of Texas summers. We're certainly not prepared for the 4 below. That was the temperature read out at my house, something that in my 40 years of living in Texas I've never experienced. And the negative wind chills of negative 30 close to at my house. So I think like most things that happen that are not expected or maybe even in some ways tragic. A lot of Texans are waking up this Monday morning. We're going to have 70 degrees today, but scratching our heads saying, what just happened, and did it have to? I was with my wife last night for dinner, and she made the comment. She said, I felt like we just lived a year inside of a week. And I think a lot of Texans are waking up feeling that way today, going, what just happened? And we all thought 2020 was over, but as you'll hear in my final thoughts here in a little bit, I think it kind of had some extra innings this week.
Well, Seth, let's peel this back a little bit. So I think there are people in different parts of the country that are really wondering, well, what's the big deal here? All right, so Texas got some cold weather. Should that have really caused all these problems? And of course, our country being so big, people experience different climates, which is understandable. So if you look at it from where I am in the Northeast, we understand it's hot in Texas, but some people are scratching their heads saying, why would, some freezing weather for a week cause such chaos? So do you have any insight as to we know why it happened, it was cold weather, but why did cold weather have such a huge negative impact?
Yeah, Dan, that's a great question. And I think what many of us are realizing today is yes, the cold weather was the cause, but the reality was caused by ineffectiveness and inefficiencies in the way that our state is structured. So, you mentioned, yeah, people up north. It's funny, my family, I have family in Minnesota. Jenna, my wife, is from there, and they were, they're used to 30 below for an extended period of time.
Right.
But, listen, I think that every area of our country is built for that area. And so, for example, up in the Northeast where you are, you build your homes with certain types of insulation, your pipes to be insulated certain ways. I think if you had a long string at 120 degrees, it would probably be very detrimental to some people. But even in the heat, there's ways to find a way to cool down. In the cold, it's really hard to find warmth. And I think that because of the way that our state infrastructure works, we just weren't prepared for it. And I'll break that down in a couple of key areas. And this was a chain effect thing, right? So, about 20% of our power here in the United States, or here in Texas, comes from renewable energy. Now, it was interesting to me to hear politicians jump on that bandwagon really quick and saying, well, down with renewable energy because these big wind turbines froze. They did. They did. And so certainly there's a conversation to be had around the fact that these wind turbines, when it's this cold, tend to freeze if they're not de-iced, or they don't have the technology to keep them de-iced. And so renewable energy went offline. But that's 20% of our energy. And we still, I think we ended up losing about 10% in total there. Fossil fuels is the vast majority of our energy, natural gas, coal. Natural gas went offline too. And that's in large part because of two things. One, here in Texas, we have natural gas stored underground. We don't pay for storage facilities here. Why? We can literally dig a hole and get natural gas out of the ground. God is storing our resource for us. So we don't invest on infrastructure to pump and store natural gas. The problem is, to pump natural gas out of the ground, you need electricity. And so what was happening is, and this is something that happens in Texas every year, is during the winter months, a lot of our energy grid goes offline to prepare itself for the summer, where it's going to get taxed, right? Where it's going to really be, utilized at its highest rate. So some of our grid was offline, some of our manufacturing was offline there. And then the second part is that we don't have infrastructure built to weather sub-zero temperatures, or even temperatures in the single digits, for a longer period of time. And so there was no way to winterize or protect the grid that was online. Now, Texas is one of the only states, matter of fact, I think it's the only state in the continental United States that has our own power grid. We don't utilize the federal power grid that the rest of our nation does. Which means that we have our own responsibility to make sure that it's set up appropriately. And unfortunately, we didn't. We didn't have the proper protocols in place to winterize it. So when the generators went offline, the energy went offline, the power grid, and when the power grid goes offline, you can't use power to pump new natural gas out of the ground. And when that's not working, now the heat doesn't work. Water treatment plants don't work. And so you have this chain effect of what ultimately happened, which were millions without power for a long period of time, many today still without water. And unfortunately, as we're looking at the dust settling, way too many have perished. Because here's the sad part of this, and this is the most tragic part of it all. People were left to choose: do we risk carbon monoxide poisoning by bringing generators or grills or something into our home to heat, or our apartments or wherever, or risk hypothermia of dying? That's a decision nobody in the most powerful nation in the world should have to deal with and have to face. But unfortunately, in Texas, many did last week, and many chose one or the other, and unfortunately, many have perished as a result.
Seth, in the New York metropolitan area, going back a few years, we had Superstorm Sandy hit. And this was a 1 in 100 year event. But it happened, and it happened within our 100 years. So we had to deal with absolute destruction, for example, along the shoreline in New Jersey, which had an impact on me and many people that I know. And during that time, it took a long time, a long time, to be able to get back to normal. And there's still some residual. And I think when we have these natural disasters happen, it wakes us up a little bit in many areas. But one thing that it does, and you alluded to this before, is that we need to be better prepared for things. And we can't be a country of wealth and prosperity the way we are and have people that are hurting in this day and age of technology as a result of a weather event, let's say, and not be able to get past it. People not having water and the basic necessities to be able to live is very disturbing. And my heart goes out to everyone in Texas, because it really is a human story. But the point I want to make here, Seth, and what you and I talk about in terms of business and politics, of course, politics creeps into everything. So I could remember with Superstorm Sandy, and our then governor, Chris Christie, was trying to get Congress to provide aid to help people. And of course, it became a political event. And Governor Christie at the time was calling out many Republicans who did not want to help, which is crazy. So I hope that Texas is going to be able to get the assistance that they need, because in the end, this is not a blue or red issue. This is an American issue, and even beyond that, it's a human issue. So one of the people that had come out, and it angered me, and I'm sure it did you, was AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, came right out initially and started talking about the Green New Deal. And I said, talk about terrible timing. Do we have to be discussing that issue right now? But to her credit, she then went and started raising money to help Texans. And incredibly, she's raised over $5 million to support the people in Texas. Now, I know, Seth, you're not one of the people that has a tendency to agree with AOC, but what's your feeling as a Texan that AOC is trying to do the right thing?
God bless her. Seriously. And I think that all too often we do get tied into partisan politics and feel like the other side is our enemy. Um, it's in situations like we're dealing with here in Texas that the best in America comes out in many. And we can put politics aside. And while I would vehemently disagree that the Green New Deal is the solution to what happened here in Texas, um, people's passion for other people, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez showed in raising money for our state, that is the solution. The solution is when we can come together, when we can put politics aside and recognize that we are all Americans first, we're humans first, and we have to care about our fellow man, and we have to do what we can to help. And I'm thankful for her and her using her platform, as many other politicians are, to try to help. I'm infuriated that our state, mostly led by Republicans, failed our citizens in this area. You know, we had studies done in 2000 after our last event in 2011 to say, here's what we need to do to make sure we're protecting our grid. And our leaders, Republicans, chose not to implement those things. And so, I think that, we talk about politics a lot here on the BizPo show. We talk about economics. The reality is the economics of what happened last week in Texas, that's going to trickle through the rest of our country. 40% of oil that is produced, energy that is produced for the United States, comes out of Texas. We're down millions of barrels a day right now as a result. What does that mean for the rest of the nation? Higher gas prices, higher fuel prices, higher energy prices, higher prices for goods and services because transportation is going to go up. The economic tentacles are going to be wide-reaching. And so going back and maybe bringing full circle to your comment, Dan, is this is an American problem. It is a Texas problem. And we need people who call themselves leaders to lead. And this may be the first time I've ever said it. But I appreciate Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez for leading in this situation. She didn't go on vacation. She didn't step away. She stepped in, and it's appreciated.
Yeah, and listen, Seth, we have to call it as we see it. And even though politically we may not agree with her, when people do the right thing, we should recognize that and encourage it because that's the only way things get better for all of us. And on the economic front, even if you were heartless enough to say, well, it's Texas's problem. What's going on down there? They created their own problem. However dismissive anybody wants to be. But to your point about the economics, Texas is a big state, and it is hugely important to the country's economic picture. So when we have things happening like this in Texas, particularly as it relates to the fuel industry, we're looking at inflation across the country, not just in Texas. So let's all recognize when these things happen, we're all interrelated, not just as Americans, but economically. So the more we help each other, no matter what the circumstances are, the more we help ourselves, and that's how we grow.
Right. That's right, my friend.
Well, with that said, Seth, we'll be right back with our final thoughts.
Welcome back to the BizPo show. As we stated at the beginning, we're doing an abbreviated version of the show this week. Given everything that's going on, we won't have a guest, but nonetheless, we still want to give you our final thoughts. So Dan, what's your final thought this week?
Seth, my final thought relates to charity and how important it is to people to give to the extent that they can. I am sure that the people of Texas who are proud people are not looking for handouts, but they can use a helping hand. So I think we can see in Texas where people are hurting to the extent we can help, why not? And I'm gonna probably mess this quote up, but I know Abraham Lincoln once said, "With malice towards none and charity towards all," or some version of that. I think that is really the building block of our country. Being charitable is not just for the rich. I mean, people who have money and they could afford to give money to help others, well, that's wonderful and it's needed. But there's also people who may not have those financial resources, but they can spend time in lending a hand and putting in some time to a cause to help others. And I think in the end, and what I've always thought, Seth, is that it feels so much better to give than it does to receive. And that's my final thought.
Well, Dan, for my final thought this week, as the song says, Texas is on my mind. Seemed like 2020 went into extra innings this past week in Texas in the wake of an unprecedented winter storm. You know, that's a word I'm okay if I never have to use again. Unprecedented. Like a third world country, millions were left to fight the cold without electricity, heat, and water. And while the electricity and heat for most has come back, many are still without drinkable water today. What's on my mind is young Christian Pineda, an 11-year-old boy living outside of Houston who woke up to see snow for the first time in his short life. Like most kids would seeing snow, his family posted a video of him playing outside as most kids would do, like my kids did. A few hours later, after that video was shot, however, Christian was found dead, lying in his bed of what appeared to be hypothermia after, like so many in Texas, temperatures inside his home plummeted after losing power. Christian's parents came to Texas from Honduras, wanting a better life for their children. What they found instead was a reality that should have never, ever happened. It was unthinkable. Texas is one of the most prosperous states in our union, a place where, because of our success, businesses are relocating, and literally millions are moving as other states look upon us with envy. We are the shining state on a hill, so to speak. But while basking in our glory, our leaders let us down. The events of this past week should have never happened. After our last unprecedented weather event in 2011, which saw similar outages and impact, legislators in our state held hearings to determine the cause and map out a solution. But unfortunately, as so often happens in government, problems are identified, but solutions aren't implemented. Updating our power grid to solve for an unprecedented event was apparently not sexy enough for politicians here in my state, who chose to focus on other things that might help regain election. And today, as a result, millions are devastated, and too many are dead. For some, the events of this past week can't be forgotten fast enough. But for many, they never will. It's devastating to see the destruction in my state, horrific to hear of those that didn't survive, and infuriating to know that it all could have been prevented. Those in my party are quick to call out the left when they overstep or call for more government. But in this situation, government wasn't the problem. Those in government were. In Texas, that certainly seems to be our problem right now. And so I'm calling out those on the right, in my own party, who run our state. Fix it. Or I'm quite certain Texans will find others that will.
Seth, that's quite a thought and very moving. And I can tell you that my heart and the hearts of all those in this nation are with Texas at this point, and all those who are in the path of this storm. I'm Dan Geltrude from New York City.
And from Dallas, Texas, I'm Seth Denson. Good night.